opening the meeting with the karakia from our Kamatua Tamapukoia, and then we'll be followed by Reverend Phil Wilson with the reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Atamari, tēnā koutou katoa e huitahi nei I rungi te reo karama. E te atua kaharawa koe ni mātou e tuku whakamoemiti ki a koe, kia manaaki tia te iti me te rahi. Kia tau mai tō manaakitanga ki rungi te koro matua, ngā mema o te kaunihira, me te iwi e pai nei I rungi te kaunihira. E tēnei mātou e mihi ki a koe, kia hora tamarino, mo te wāhi I takahi te tangata I rungi te mato o te whenua. Ko koe tau mātou peringa, ko koe tau mātou tokatu moana, anei mātou e whakawheta I rungi te ingoa tau mātou kau whakaora, ngā ake ake, āmini. Tēnā koutou.
Morena tātou. I know that you folk are all here because of your desire to serve this city. And so I have a little reading here from a book written by Robert Greenleaf some years ago entitled Servant Leadership. And he says this idea came out of reading Nobel laureate Hermann Hesse's book Journey to the East. In this story we see a band of men on a mythical journey, probably also Hesse's own journey. The central figure of the story is Leo, who accompanies the party as the servant and who does their menial chores, but who also sustains them with his spirit and his song. He is a person of extraordinary presence. All goes well until Leo disappears, and then the group falls into disarray and the journey is abandoned. They cannot make this journey without the servant Leo. The narrator, one of the party, after some years of wandering, finds Leo and is taken into the order that sponsored the journey. There he discovers that Leo, whom he had known first as a servant, was in fact the head of the order, its guiding spirit, a great and noble leader. He concludes, this story clearly says that the great leader is seen as a servant first, and this simple fact is the key to the leader's greatness.
Thank you.
Philip Wilson for your reading, and also our Kamatua Tame. Thank you for bringing a spiritual aspect to this meeting. Appreciate it. So we open this council meeting of the 21st of May 2019 at 9:35 a.m. at Hamilton City Council. Kiri roa. And we'll start with apologies. Democracy Manager Leanne.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Kia ora tātou. This morning we have apologies from the Deputy Mayor, Martin Gallagher, for absence. Are there any other apologies?
Might be a little bit ambitious, but looking quite fine tonight.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Mark. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. Confirmation of agenda. Again, Democracy Manager Leanne Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Confirmation of the agenda this morning is as set out in your run sheet. Thank you.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor James. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. Declarations of interest. There are no declarations of interest disclosed at this stage. Public forum, again, I'll hand over to the Democracy Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Welcome this morning to the members of the public that are speaking in public forum. When I call your name, can you come forward to the desk directly in front of you? It's slightly different, Roger, from when you were with us the other week. Roger, perhaps if you could come forward. Roger Stratford is speaking to item 7, the Chair's report. Roger, you may recall you've got 5 minutes, including questions, and a bell will go at 4 minutes to let you know that there's 1 minute remaining. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors. I'm speaking on the contestable cat desexing fund mayoral proposal this morning. As it's anticipated, animal control will anticipate to operate $100,000 per annum fund for this purpose. I believe the council should not approve the addition of this proposal to the upcoming annual plan review. The significance assessment which we've been given has some flaws, I believe, in it. I don't believe that a decision to implement the desexing fund is as irreversible as it's implied. Simply reversing a decision of council will be more problematic than you could anticipate. There's also a matter of consistency. If the desexing fund applies to cats, in the future we could have it applied to dogs as well, and I believe that this is a private matter for the agencies concerned, and this council should not get involved in this matter. I believe that this is of higher public interest than has been indicated in the report. The only cultural consideration listed is that of manakatanga, or what I understand to be of the life quality, and cats are kept as pets by homeowners across the city. Why don't we have a look at the precedents? We saw in the papers, just in the current papers today and a couple of days ago, yesterday, where pets are threatened in cases of domestic abuse, and a fund has been set up by in Auckland for to house the domestic abuse victims. To house the pets of domestic abuse victims. So cats play a very important role as pets. Turning back to the siege of Leningrad back in September 1941, when the Wehrmacht marched and surrounded the city, it was held under siege for 2 or 3 winters. Finally, corridors were set up when the Lake Ladoga froze, and the people suffered immensely. The residents of Leningrad. In the first winter, they had a huge problem with food supplies. They had to mix sawdust with their food, with their bread, and so on. And we all know the trauma they would have had to have gone through, and they were relegated to having to capture and eat their own pets, including cats, dogs and horses. All the cats of the city of Leningrad during the siege were all consumed or killed in some way. But residents of the city would trade their cats as pets, so they wouldn't have to eat their own pet. As a consequence of this decimation of the cat population in Leningrad during the siege, there was a proliferation of rats. Rats covered the whole city, and there was a major problem with the rat population, and rats absolutely overtook the city. In the final winter, 5 train cars of 5,000 cats were brought in. Cats were brought in, especially from all over Russia. They got rid of the rats, and today there's a monument to cats in Leningrad. At the metro station, there's statues of cats, and they're quite highly valued in the city, much as we have a monument to the Great War Horse here in Memorial Park. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger.
Our next speakers and last speakers in public forum this morning are from representatives from Pools for Life. So Jay Johansson and Rachel Ma, if you could come forward, please. You don't need to turn your microphones on. We can organise them from here for you, okay? So the same situation applies. You have 5 minutes and the bell will go at a minute so that you know that you're running out of time. All right?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning. So Jay and myself run the Paws for Life Charitable Trust. We are seeking help from the council because the feline problem in the Hamilton region is enormous. So to be clear, we are not seeking help for desexing owned cats or subsidised desexing. That is not what we're looking for. The Hamilton region has a massive stray cat problem, abandoned cats, neglected cats, abused cats, unwanted cats breeding, which in turn creates more cats. They're prolific breeders and kittens can breed from 4 months old. So the problem gets out of control very, very quickly. Paws for Life is the only animal rescue shelter in the Hamilton region that is taking in these cats. We do not help people with subsidised desexing. That is not what we're there for. We have a very high euthanasia rate because we will not release wild cats, desex cats, that for trap, neuter and release, we will not do that. Any animal that is ill or dangerous will be euthanised. So our euthanasia rates have gone through the roof, so that is costing us an awful amount of money. Any animals that come in that can be rehomed, we desex, vaccinate, and very importantly, we microchip them so that we can turn the city around. So we know where the animals belong to. They're all identified, they're all microchipped, and they're all desexed. There's always going to be people that don't desex their own cats, but that's not our issue. Our issue is to clean up the city. So we're taking cats and kittens from kindies, from schools, from elderly people that have to move into care, from average Joe Blows who've had deaths in the family that can't rehome their pets, from kittens tied up in rubbish bags, found in rubbish bins and dumpsters, where off building sites, off farms, you name it, that's where the animals are, and that's the animals that we want. So we're not there to, it's not that we're pro-cat, we're just pro-welfare and we're pro the city. We need to clean it up. The impact on the environment is massive, as you can well imagine. So if you've got one stray cat on a farm and they keep breeding, they're going to be spreading disease, they're going to be wild, they're going to impact people's lives. And this is where we also see a lot of cruelty as well. So we're working with people in our community to make sure that we can do what we can for the animals and for those families. There is 1,000,001 situations why animals need to come into a rescue shelter, and the buck stops with us basically. If the animal cannot go back into the community, with no problem putting it down for the right reasons. Jay?
Just reiterating what Rachel has said, our goal is not to subsidise desexing for the general public. It is to clear up Hamilton. So we do a lot of trapping. So we are taking wild, stray, feral animals of farmland. We're taking them out of our gullies. We're taking them out of parks. So one park that we cleared up a couple of years ago is a long-tail bat project echolocation. We took out over 50 just from a small park. We're cleaning up the uni on a regular basis. Hillcrest is a terrible area for neglected, stray, abandoned animals. And most importantly, we're clearing up schools. So we've just cleared all of the cats out of Melville High School. That was the last week and the week before. So these kids can go back to school. There's not going to be animal excrement all over their playground anymore. There's not cats breeding under their classrooms anymore.
So in the last 12 months, we've taken in 1,500 cats and kittens off the street. So that's 1,500, just what we can do with our very, very minimal resources. So they're either desexed and rehomed, or they've been put to sleep humanely. If we don't do anything, this problem will not go away and it will start impacting us, and there's nowhere else for them to go. So Paws for Life is doing the work. There are other rescues in the Greater Hamilton area, and we all do it slightly differently, but we all do a great job. So we desperately need the city to help us help clean up the city. It is impacting in such a negative way, and we just need the help. We can't do it alone.
Okay, I think we've got time for one question, Mark.
How are you funded?
By
We're not.
donations and adoptions. So
That's it.
no other funding. People don't really allow funding to animal welfare groups. We're- yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we now move to item 5, page 6, confirmation of council open minutes for the 4th of April 2019, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Mark. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. Item 6, page 18, confirmation of extraordinary council open minutes, 9th of May 2019, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Paula. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. We now move to item 7, page 23. Sorry, so this is the Chair's report.
There's no page numbers on
Oh,
our
sorry.
index.
Page 24.
Some of us at least are trying to use the electronic system now.
Page 24. The report. Okay, so it's Chair's report, attachment 1. Item 7. Okay, so we'll take the report as read, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Mark. Are there, Councillor Robb?
Look, my machine's not working, but I presume the speaker is. I've got some questions, Mayor Andrew, and the first question I've got is, what does it mean by a mayoral fund proposal, which is in the headline of your Chair's report? What does mayoral fund mean?
So could I ask Andy to come forward, please, to the table? Thank you, Andy. So could you explain how the fund will work?
Kia ora, councillors. In terms of the answering of the question around mayoral fund, it's been articulated, I guess, and the mayor is putting forward the idea of the fund rather than there being a secret meaning behind there. In terms of the question,
I was just a little confused as to whether it was coming out of a mayoral fund or coming out of general community funds, I suppose.
We've talked with our colleagues in Animal Education Control and think the method of having it in their budget line, we would offer support in terms of utilising our online database Smarty Grants, but we would see it as part of the Animal Education Control.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. Is the 100,000, and I don't know who to ask this question to, but is 100,000 expected to be the gross amount inclusive of costs, or is it a disbursement to the groups of 100,000 and council will meet the administration costs of operating and running the fund?
It's been anticipated that there would be a contestable fund of 100,000. Yep, so the administration would be subsumed into business as usual.
So do you have an estimate of what it's, you know, you mentioned Smarty Grants, which has got some costs attached to using that, but there's also staff time that might be required to administer, to do all the checking, because I notice that there are quite significant conditions on applicants, and then presumably there will be ongoing monitoring to ensure that the 100,000 is spent in a way that complies with all of those conditions.
You're correct. We would make sure that we're rigorous in both the receiving of applications and ensuring that accountabilities are fulfilled. In terms of those who are registered charities who are doing this work. We've got a limited pool of organisations within our city. So in terms of, we wouldn't be anticipating hundreds of applications, we'd be anticipating a handful of applications which our team at the Animal Education Control know of, and so there's already those kind of inbuilt checks. In terms of the administration of a fund, we would hope that it could be built in little by them, little by us, little by procurement. So rather than needing significant additional resources, the little by the different parties will ensure that it doesn't become an
But there
onerous
would be a cost, wouldn't there? Have you sort of indicated to the Mayor when he put this proposal up, you know, whether it would be 50,000 or across the organisation, and or whatever figure across the organisation in terms of the actual costs and the share of overheads that would ultimately get allocated to this?
We haven't gone into that detail.
Okay. Is it envisaged that the fund might be dispersed to more than one organisation?
It's anticipated as a contestable grant that it would go to more than one. Probably there's 3 or 4 organisations that our team at the Animal Education Control work with. So that would be anticipated, the size of the grant pool.
Okay. What else have I got here? Yeah, no, that's all I wish to ask. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy, for being there. This fund obviously is coming from ratepayers, but the presenters talked about cleaning up Melville School, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask them now, but in the same way that, you know, you get a guy into your house to clean up your flies and your mosquitoes and things like that, did the school pay you to do the tidy up?
Okay. Excuse me, Gary. You need.
Andy, are there any opportunities for these guys to get commercial type work? We're talking about cleaning up our gullies. So do they just go in on their own bat and just clean up the gullies, or do we ask them to go in and clean up the gullies?
I don't have that answer.
Who's our gully guy?
Lance would be our gully guy.
So as a council, we're a landowner. So we're a landowner.
Yep.
E.g. parks, and if it's public land and it's in a gully, then we would have moral and sometimes legal responsibilities to actually manage animal pests. There's also a regional pest management plan which the regional council administer. I've just been Googling it now. Cats and feral cats don't seem to be in that plan. But what we would do is actually look at the ecological outcomes that we want, and then we would actually look at the pest species within that gully and then target those pest species, whether they be mustelids like weasels, stoats and ferrets, possums and rats and things like that. And feral cats could well be one, because obviously they predate on native birds, exotic birds, and also other things like bats.
Have we ever engaged anyone to do work with cats? It may not particularly be paws, but it could be some other exterminator of some sort.
Yes, we do, but not extensively, mainly for possums, rats and hares and rabbits on our more pastoral type properties. Cats, probably less frequent.
Okay, thank you. Just with the situation, they did say in their presentation that they had gone into gullies and done work like that. Do they contact you when they do that? Do they? And I'm not trying to catch them out at all. But
I'm not aware of the operational detail, but there are community groups working with Gerard Kelly and other people in our Parks Department, you know, and quite often those community groups take responsibility. Obviously, we would generally know what's going on. We may not be overly involved operationally because we quite often rely on those volunteer groups to do most of the labour that's involved. So, you know, we'd have an oversight of that, and just hearing the speakers before, obviously you guys are acting lawfully and in a humane way, so and that's what we'd be encouraging.
Okay, thank you, Lance.
Councillor Angela.
Thanks, Mayor Andrew. I'm not quite sure who to direct these questions to. I'm just interested in, have we spoken to Regional Council? And I know that Lance has said he's just Googled. I Googled last night, and I know their policy around feral cats. Is this fund, what are the parameters for this fund? It's not going to, because we would be going against Department of Corrections and the Regional Council's policy if we allowed this fund to be used to de-sex feral cats, because they say capture and destroy. So I'm trying to understand the...
It's definitely anticipated through the conversations with both the team from Paws for Life and others that there is a strong work in the community about rehousing cats, and in the rehousing of cats we want to ensure that, you know, that they're as healthy as possible. So there's the vet fees that are associated with the desexing of the cats so it's not around the feral population, it is around the rehoming of populations. So both Paws for Life and other community groups receive cats that owners are no longer able or willing to look after. So it's definitely, as Rachel said, it's not about getting a wild animal and trying to rehome that. It is around those who have been donated.
Okay.
Excuse me, can I just interrupt there, please? So, a representative from Paws for Life, could you just comment on how you would handle a feral cat and what you would do with that, in answer to Angela's question, as far as how your organisation would handle it?
So for a truly feral or wild cat, they would be humanely euthanised. If it's a wild or feral kitten, generally under the age of 6 weeks, it can be rehabilitated pretty easily and rehomed.
Thank you, Rachel. Angela, continue.
Thank you. And just from following on from Councillor Pascoe's questions, you don't have any idea, no work was done on the costs to us to administer the fund. I know with other contestable funds, there's always a reporting back mechanism. So when will all of that be developed?
Excuse me, Andy, we'll ask Chief Esgate.
So in terms of the additional costs, this will be managed along the lines of other contestable funds that you're involved with already, correct, Andy, and so there won't be any additional staff time or overheads attributed. So it's expected that the only outlay for us will be whatever portion of the $100,000 that is distributed is how this has been proposed. Yep.
Sorry, CE, how is there no extra administrative costs for a new contestable fund?
Well, the team have the capacity to pick it up, is my understanding.
We'll make it work.
Okay.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Thank you to the presenters. Just a question in terms of, can you just refresh us, Andy, because I made commentary on this in the Community and Services Committee last. How much is in the contestable community funding single year grants for all charities across the city on an annual basis?
This year we allocated 310,700.
310,000. And unfortunately, Paws for Life were one of the many charities that didn't get through this round, weren't they?
That is correct. One of our criteria is around the number of trustees or board members and the number of trustees, board members that sit. So in our community assistance policy, in the criterion guidelines, we talk about 4 board members as being a minimum. And they unfortunately don't have 4 trustees.
They don't have the structure that the current criteria
for our single year grant applies to.
Allows for. But I'm right in saying that the outcome of that meeting, the discussion at that meeting was twofold, that we might look at the quantum of community grants going forward, whether it's sufficient, at least I flagged that idea, and also that the criteria, we noticed some anomalies in the criteria. It comes up for review next year, doesn't it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Okay, a couple of questions. So just following on from Councillor Paul there, did any animal welfare groups get grants in our community grants?
There were no other applications
Okay.
that fit animal welfare.
Okay. Secondly, there's a part of the proposal is that the funds can only be used for cats that are located within the Hamilton City Council boundaries. Now, Councillor Robb alluded to that. How do we keep that as a check and balance that that's being administered? I mean, they referred to farmland and the likes.
Through either the application process or the accountability process, one would have that as a question that would be asked.
Yep.
When we talk about $100,000, our vet fees are somewhere in the $80,000 to $150,000 to de-sex a male or female cat, and so we're talking about essentially 1,000 cats that would be supported through this fund. And as Rachel mentioned, they've dealt in the last year with 1,500 cats, and we know that other organisations are dealing with similar numbers, so there's no concern that we would be stealing Waikato or Waipa's cats for this process.
No, okay, cool. And just on that, so other agencies around, we've alluded to other agencies, I presume the SPCA.
Yeah.
How many others around that you know of?
There's 4 particular organisations that our animal education control team work with in this space.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Leo.
Yeah, part of my question already been answered about the cost. I notice along the river walkways and those sort of places that probably on an annual basis that council puts out a bait in order to probably kill the rats and possums and whatever other animals. Do you know if we pick up many cats during that poisoning period?
I'm sorry, Councillor, I couldn't answer that.
Don't know whether Lance would know.
Unlikely, because the toxin used for possums and rats is pretty unlikely to be eaten by a cat. Just for the cereal base, some of them would, but it also depends on the size of the animal too. So a lot of our possum control is trapping as well, so using Tim's traps and things like that.
Now I notice on page 25, which is the annual plan proposal, it appears to me as though this has been written specifically for one organisation. When I look at it, it says providing assistance to the organisation, and then further on it says and their operation. There, of course, is the wrong there, but some material, I suppose. Yeah. So, is there any other organisation besides Paws for Life has approached us about this?
I believe the conversation has started with Paws for Life approaching council in terms of some of their operational needs. The writing of this would be that organisation that has received our grant, so that it's not limited to a singular, but it is the idea of rather the proposal here isn't a service level agreement with Paws for Life. The proposal here is a contestable grant to deal with the issue of our cats needing de-sexed in the city.
Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Did I hear correctly that Paws for Life is a registered charitable trust?
That is correct.
Because it flagged to me when we say in our own policy we have the 3 people thing, that to be a registered charitable trust, they have to meet very stringent legal requirements under the Charities Act. So I'd suggest that maybe we need to look at our own policy there in terms of exercising some discretion, given that there's a much higher law that trusts in these entities have to abide by. So I just flag that to you and our GM.
Yep, noted.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I might have missed this, but how much is it on average to euthanise a cat? How much does it cost?
Sorry,
Yes,
I'm not familiar with the costed euthanise, sorry.
Jay, if you could come to the table and just answer that question and then leave the table, please.
No problem. The cost of euthanasia and disposal is dependent on where you take the cat. For example, given our specific contract with our vet, we can euthanise and dispose of a cat for roughly $25.
How much, sorry?
25.
25. And how much to desex?
So a male castrate costs us 45, and to desex a female costs us 70.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Oh, thanks. Just following Councillor Ryan's question, is it correct that legally to form a charitable trust you need 3 trustees under the Act that governs that, Charitable Trusts Act or whatever it's called?
I don't know that.
This way I know the answer because I've set up one. So you never ask a question like that if you don't know the answer. And our own rule says 4. Is that a management policy or a policy decided around this table?
That was decided by councillors as a way of when we as council...
Sorry, which I know I asked it whether it was decided by this around this table by councillors. When was that put up?
That was last year, so during this triennium.
So it was an actual resolution by council that said four people?
That's correct.
Okay. So we might need to bring that forward because it seems to be, like Ryan says, totally out of kilter with the law.
The conversation around the table, councillor, was one of we used to require registration with charity services, and the decision was that that was an onerous process for some smaller organisations, but rather than having that, the conversation was not wanting to have Ma and Pa charitable trust being funded. It was still to ensure that there was that wide community effect. So that was the conversation with councillors around not having charity services but having a minimum number of trustees.
Could we be supplied with a copy of the resolution for that? Thanks.
Yes, I can do that.
Councillor Siggy.
Andrew, just quickly going back to the annual contestable fund, you said there was $310,000, is that right?
That was allocated this year, 310.
Yeah. So this would be an increase of an extra 100,000. So that is a massive increase, and it was hard. Wasn't it hard to even get extra money for the contestable fund before? And now we're
The recommend. This is talking about not increasing our single-year community grant by $100,000. This is a specific fund, like our Heritage Fund or our Waste Minimalisation Fund, where it's a very targeted, rather than our single year, which is wider, well-being effects.
But with the annual contestable fund, it is quite wide, isn't it?
That's correct.
Community-wide, this is very narrow.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move to debate. So just before we start, to be clear, what we're debating here is the establishment of a contestable cat desexing fund for consideration in the annual plan deliberations. So all we're debating on today is whether this goes through into the annual plan discussion later, and that's the chance to debate more fully on the merits or not of the proposal. So what we're debating on now is whether this goes through to the next step, which is later in the meeting, which is then your chance to debate fully the merits or not of the proposal. So everyone clear on that for debate? Okay, so we've had a briefing on this on the 21st of March, at which time we had, in my memory of that briefing, it was about an hour long, and that was a chance for everybody to come on this journey and understand what was happening and what this was all about. So from that point, we had staff we had senior staff invited. They allocated a staff member to be there who picked it up and carried this forward. So staff have been working on this and have looked into this. So now what this resolution is proposing is taking it through to the annual plan discussion, which is later on in this meeting. Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I'm sorry that I missed that part of the briefing. I've been to 95% of all the briefings and I don't recall, and I can't get back in my diary to find out where else I was. But nevertheless, we were over 300% oversubscribed in the single-year grants, and this is relative to this topic. Many of charities did not get support that actually do help council in their social and environmental wellbeing, and they missed out, and Pause for Life was sadly one of those. We also recently in the LTP, where we were juggling what things we would give priority to, spent over 60 million in the purchase of inner city property, and I'd much rather have put just 1% of that, into the community grants, because this would have benefited many of our charitable organisations and local communities. So I am going to support this going forward to the annual plan. The difficulty I do have with that is that it, unfortunately, and I lost out on this one too, we're not going to go out to the public with the annual plan, so the opportunity for them to have a say on that is diminished. But what I will say in supporting this for the time being, because I do think they do fantastic work and I do think there is an environmental issue around stray cats, I strongly, however, support an urgent review of the amount of money in the community funding, because if we give animal welfare 100,000, there's 300,000 split, less than that, split across the rest of the charities across Hamilton. So you can see why I'm thinking that this isn't potentially the correct way to go about it. I support, as I say, an urgent review of the current amount of community funding into all community grants, and I made that quite clear in my chair's report at Community Services. I'm not happy with us being one of the low-end contributors to community grants, and we all agreed that the criteria of those grants should be reviewed, and I believe that would allow for criteria that would let Pause for Life and other such animal welfare charities come to the table.
Councillor, you're getting way off topic.
No, I'm not. I'm coming to topic.
Excuse me, Councillor. We're debating whether we take this through to the annual plan or not.
Yes.
So that's what the decision that we're asking you to take.
Let me get to that, Mayor Andrew. Without interruption, that would be lovely.
Your debate needs
I strongly support the urgent review of all community funding, which would allow for more funding to go into charities such as this one, who I do believe do good work. But I think the process that we've gone about to do this is flawed. We have picked one charity over many other charities that missed out, and they are a good charity, and I do want to see them do the good work that they do. But we should be doing it through the community grants process.
So just point of order on accuracy. This isn't about one charity. This is about multiple charities who desex cats in the Hamilton area. Thank you. Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I don't support the request, despite having sympathy and having been a cat owner for most of my life, and having sympathy for the wonderful work that those groups do, in animal welfare. I'm disappointed that this is a late request, a month or so out from signing off the annual plan, when I remember clearly your request, Mayor Andrew, for us to have all of our lists of annual plan requests to you so we could initiate those last December. There is, in my view, lack of information on administration costs, and each of these requests comes with a cost to administer. To suggest that this was considered in a briefing in March, my recollection was it was considered in the Mayor's update, and there were no staff present, and I'm not aware, and it certainly seems today, in terms of my questions, that staff have not or are not up to date with what the likely costs to administer this fund is going to be. And I think back when we say we can absorb it in our current costs, as the CE has said, that we have around about 300 more full-time equivalent staff in the organisation than we had 4 years ago. So every one of these requests comes along with the need to increase staff as we increase activity. I have no idea what the administration costs are, but I reckon they could well top half of what the fund is likely to be. Listening to Pause for Life this morning, I'm not sure if the proposal in the way that it's written actually meets their needs, because they mentioned that they do a lot more than the desexing of cats. My suggestion is this request be held over and included in next year's annual plan, leaving opportunities for other groups to participate. We can have proper and full diligence by staff, and we can have an informed measurement as to whether or not the organisation can afford this, bearing in mind that our budget for balancing our books in the 1920 year is still and will still show a deficit. Thank you.
So just a point of correction on accuracy, point of order, is staff were invited to that who allocated members from the pound to be there to report back to them, back to leadership. So there was very definitely staff there at the meeting. Councillor Gary.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the work that you guys do and the sacrifice you make to improve our city, so thank you very much. However, I think there's 3 questions we need to decide. We've got to decide if it's actually our mandate. Is this part of what we're supposed to be doing? Now, there's lots and lots of really, really good work that's done by charity groups throughout the...
Just leave it on, Gary.
Just keep turning off. Okay. There's a heck of a lot of really good charity work on around the city which we have no involvement with, and I don't know if I'm not sure that this is part of our mandate. I think it might be more a regional council. I'm not even sure, so I want to have that clarified. Secondly, I want to, if it is our mandate, then we have to decide who is the best person to do the job. So I don't, and please don't take any offence from this, I don't know why we're limiting it to charities. I mean, this is pest destruction. And these guys might be really, really good at it, but there are lots of people out there that do pest destruction, so I would suggest that we should find out what is the mandate we want, what we want done, and then find out who is the best operator to do it. And thirdly, and this is probably the most important one, is this still needs to be weighed up against all the other things we want to spend in our annual plan. So I think it is, I will probably support this going through to go into that contest, and by that I mean a contest not against other charitable organisations. I mean a contest about roading and water treatment and all the other expenditure we've got, which we do on behalf of our community. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Yeah, I'm going to support this going to the next stage. I have some reservations, not about the way it's come up, because it did come up in the last minute, and I think it's absolutely churlish to suggest that because we hadn't realised it was an issue last December we can't bring it up. I think that's nuts. It's our job as councillors to make sure that any issues that come before us we consider, and an issue came before us a couple of months ago and we are considering it. Whether it's, like Gary, I have some issues about how well it stacks up. It's certainly in its entirety. But the time to discuss that is when you're looking at all of them together, not just one of them alone. If we were to wait another year, like Councillor Robb suggested, from the information we had before, there could be 3 more generations of cats, and you could multiply 100 cats to about 100,000 in that time. Though that's obviously a bit extreme. That's the sort of if you leave problems like that, you're going to exacerbate the problem by the time you come around to doing something about it and had all the reports and proper discussions. You've got 10 times the problem that you had before. I agree actually with Gary's comment. Ideally, this is a regional council. These are pests in that category, and it's a regional council issue they ought to be dealing with. But traditionally, the regional council hasn't looked at pest control issues within Hamilton City. We've had a major problem with the regional council for many years over that. They look at the pest control issues around the halo, they call it, around the outside of the city, and particularly relating to things like possums and that coming into the city. They don't look at what's that problem in the city, and you have different pest control issues within cities than you do in countrysides. So Gary does raise a good point, and if I were to support at the end of the day some money going in here, I would think we need to couple that with with tackling the regional council on what are they doing or what is their strategy for controlling pests inside the cities. So let's have a bit there. In terms of whether it should be a charitable group or not, ideally, again, it shouldn't be a charitable group or any charitable group having to do this. Our own, or the regional council's own, pest control strategies and operations should be able to cover it. But we've been told already that by our own animal control people that the real name should be Animals Minus Cats Control Unit, because that's what it is at the moment, unfortunately. And that's no reflection on the staff there, that's our council policy. So the issue's been raised, been drawn to our attention, so let's see what we can do about it and see the priority in respect of all of the things we have to do.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. Look, first off, Pause for Life do amazing work around our city, and thank you very much for the work you do, because no one else is going to do it. And under the forest and bird stats, there's around 220 cats per square kilometre in New Zealand on average, and they kill about 18.76 million animals, including 1.12 million native birds in New Zealand. But another $100,000, and it is a little bit out of left field, that's come towards us today. And it said the cat, you never own a cat, cat owns you. It looks like a cat may start to own $100,000 of ratepayer money. We've just asked the ratepayer to fork out, on average, 9.7% rates hike. And now we're asking for 100,000 of that to go towards desexing or euthanising cats. In the staff report here, they said there is a low public interest in this. Why don't we come through, I think we have to come through around it by another way. Rob said that he's been assured that HCC can absorb the costs here, but actually it's the ratepayer that's absorbing the costs. How about a different approach here where we treat cats like dogs and actually register the things and give a significant discount to owners if they supply proof of microchipping and desexing? I think that's the way we should be going. Thank you.
Councillor Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I will be supporting this going through to the next stage because it's real. It's a real problem and we have to do something about it. I've been out to see the work that Pause for Life do in Glenview, and I would urge anyone who hasn't been out there to go and have a look. I was stunned by the dedication of the people working there. I was stunned by the huge number of voluntary hours they were putting in. But I was stunned also by the just incredible deluge of misery. Cats just kept on coming and kept on coming. And you heard them say, I think, that they've collected 1,500 cats off the streets in the last few months alone. I mean, that's just chronic. So they're not doing it for their own satisfaction and joy. They're not doing it for fun. They're doing it because it's a fundamental problem in the city. It's real, and it's been a problem for a long time. So I support us trying to do something tangible to help and to fix this problem. Thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Look, if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it, and who's going to do it? This idea has been brought up in mayoral briefings in the past. This is just for consideration. And as far as I can see, the Mayor is asking for the opportunity to debate it during the annual plan time. Yep, the timing is late, but why can't we be nimble? Why can't we be nimble? There's been a few suggestions that this is prioritising pets over people, and there's been a bit of, tension between that and the community grants. This is no more pets before people than our supplying dog parks are, or supplying dog facilities. They're both pets. There was an article in the Herald recently, I think Roger Stratford brought it up, about a study from Women's Refuge about victims of domestic abuse staying in relationships for fear that the partner will harm the animal if the abused person was to leave. Pets get removed from those places and handed into these agencies for reasons that would turn your stomach. The way we look after our domestic animals is a very human issue. There is study after study after study that suggests the way we treat our domestic animals speaks to our character and speaks to the way that our youth are going to grow up. These are the animals we're talking about, not the ones, the well-kept ones at home. There are enormous amounts of great pet owners around the place, and as Rachel made it very clear, these are not the people who are targeted with this initiative. I think, speaking to Councillor Paula's well-made point, to compare this to community grants is a little bit of a long bow. And while this is an initiative that would benefit the community, this is a biodiversity issue. This is a biodiversity issue. But having said that, I would get my shoulder right behind you, Paula, with an increase into community grants as well. And I can think of a couple of projects that we've got up in the annual plan that I would happily biff to get this one ahead. Is this a part of our mandate, Councillor Gary asked? One of our community outcomes that we've all agreed to is to provide a great river city in which to live, work and play and visit. To me, the cat problem that's been clearly identified by not only Paws for Life but the SPCA severely encroaches on our livability as a wonderful river city. Councillor James talks about it costing ratepayers a lot of money. I agree. And I think the cost, though, would be greater if we don't. I'd absolutely support Councillor Dave's initiative to start leaning on the regional council, because I think this is an initiative that they really ought to be looking seriously at. I'd also support the registration of cats, and that's a debate for another day. We are the capital city of a province that is built on animals. We should be leading the way on the way we manage our animal population. This is a shining example. The SPCA went down a couple of years ago, and we did nothing. So I suggest we don't let this kind of thing happen again.
Right of reply. This is very simple. You vote it down now and it's gone, or put this through for consideration later in this meeting during the annual plan discussion. We'll go to the board to vote.
The motion is carried, 8 for, 4 against.
Thank you. We'll now move to item 8, page 29. Thank you, Development Contributions team. We'll take the report as read, but anything you'd like to ask or add, now's your opportunity.
Yes, good morning, Mayor and Councillors. I would like to take the report as read, but I would like to make several introductory comments. This item seeks approval of recommended changes for incorporation into a final development contributions policy 1920 for adoption on 20 June this year. The updated policy would be in effect 1 July. The Council consulted the public on the proposed amendments in April, and elected members heard verbal submissions at an extraordinary Council meeting on the 9th of May. Some submissions covered areas of the policy not proposed for change, and elected members have requested further information on these matters. These issues have been summarised in point 5 on page 22 of the agenda. Staff will bring a report to Council to address these information requests of elected members no later than 17th of September this year, and a briefing beforehand if requested. In this report, there are 4 recommended changes to the current policy. There are corresponding resolutions to these changes for 4 out of the 5 changes, and I'll just quickly brief those changes. So the first is to refresh the DC model, change 1. That was in resolution 12D of that 4 April meeting. The second change is to redistribute some growth into the Rotokauri catchment to reflect SHA growth in the Rotokauri North SHA. Briefly on that, this is a new recommendation. It's generally comprised in change 1, which is to refresh the growth in DC model, but we've separated it out here for visibility, and it is a direct response to submission feedback. To avoid confusion, this is a recommendation to update Council's growth model, which is a broad growth projection model for the city. It is informed by developments in the Rotokauri North SHA, but it's not a direct reflection of the private developer agreement development or specific matters there. This recommendation is made because staff undertaking growth modelling are satisfied in the context of the broader city that more growth in that area is sufficiently likely for the purpose of calculating development contributions. Change 4 is the CBD remission, which we're quite familiar with. That was resolved in 12B in the 4 April. And the change 5 is the introduction of cap charges in Rotokauri, which was resolved in principle at that meeting and is just subject to having the correct charges updated to it. Finally, change 3, staff are recommending that we do not go ahead with that change due to strong opposition from submitters and its trivial nature. Finally, later, following 4th of April, at an extraordinary council meeting on the 9th of May, council resolved not to include additional identified capital projects into the DC schedule of assets, which was consulted on as a proposal and taken to the public in April. And in page 20 of the agenda, you can refer to resolution C1 to see council's specific resolution. The impact of the recommended changes in this report to council's DC revenue compared to the 10-year plan DC revenue projection is $14.03 million positive. And I'm happy to take questions on these and any other matters.
Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Greg. Possibly a question for yourself or Jen. Because this whole DC policy is moving at pace, one of my concerns, as I've mentioned in email, is around the triggering to the developers around the consent trigger points, the resource consent, CCC and services. And the comment back is that it was largely for Peacock shortfall funding, which makes sense. Are we, or can we, will we be clearer in our, DC infrastructure requirements to developers, be clear that that is largely going to be for Peacocks or where those triggers would be? Because you can appreciate the cash flow implications and the fear that that's caused amongst developers.
Yeah, sure. So first point, that's on the list for the September report. So there's quite a lot that you can go into there. So I won't address that in detail here. Short answer though is yes, we need to make sure there's better certainty for the developers and they have a better understanding of what's coming. Absolutely, business certainty is really important. And other than to say those are statutory mandated points in time where council can assess DCs. So that's kind of the platform. But we'll bring back something more detailed and a briefing if requested is probably a good time to talk about the specifics there.
Yeah, so I'm just going to jump in there. So the key aspect of the need to assess at various trigger points for demand reflects the extent to which council has introduced infrastructure into that cell in terms of our 10-year plan and so forth. So if there is increased infrastructure that's going to be invested, which potentially means that from a timing perspective there may well be differences in the DC charges at those various points, that conversation will be had with developers. They will be made aware of it, and they will be made aware that given that council may well have changed its approach for investing in infrastructure in those areas outside the 10-year plan or through the annual plan or whatever it is, that will trigger higher DCs, because we will be considering a later point to ensure there's a better alignment of demand and the capital requirements. So that conversation we have already with the developers, but we're going to make a point of making sure that conversation is far more articulated going forward as well. Because effectively that's the driver at this point in time as to why we've introduced those different levers, is because of those different trigger points, because of the capital requirements that come along as well.
Yeah.
Because you're right, you used the word for it happened really fast. The reason that it's not about peacocks, because I just want to make that absolutely clear. What it is about is fast-moving growth cells, and it happens to be our fast-moving growth cell that has required us to put significant infrastructure into is peacocks. So we're not picking on peacocks, we're picking on the extent to which a growth cell has had significant infrastructure invested above and beyond what was originally captured in the DC policy as per the previous 10-year plan. So I just want to draw that distinction.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I'm just looking for that confidence that as best in practice, best in business, will work early, and with that articulated clarity that you talked about.
Yep. And that work's underway. So we're aware of that issue, and we'll come back to you and provide you that confidence, but you can have confidence that that's important. We're onto that one already. Thanks.
Councillor Robb.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 32, you mentioned that no new capital projects will be included. Does that encompass sort of new projects, including in addition to projects that might already be in the 10-year plan?
No, it doesn't. No, it only relates to things that are already in the 10-year plan that might be contemplated to have some recovery through DCs, which was determined through a resolution that...
So that resolution, you believe, is quite clear that it would only be the capital projects that are currently in the 10-year plan that particular resolution on the 9th of May would impact on. So anything new, if the bridge, for example, over to Peacock came ahead for some reason, it would be included in the calculation within this 2-year window where we've decided to exclude?
What we're saying is nothing new is going to come in until it's had a proper opportunity to be considered by council with the next LTP plus the full consultation process, etc. So basically we've got a 10-year plan program and a schedule of assets which we're recovering, and we'll continue to do that, and at the next LTP we will do what we normally do, which is we go in and do a full review and reconsider everything.
Okay, but my question was, if we have a brand new capital project that comes up within the next 2 years before the LTP, that will also be excluded from the DC calculation if it would otherwise have gone in there?
Under that resolution, we would wait till the 10-year plan.
Okay, so what guarantees can you give me in 2 years' time when the long-term plan is being renegotiated or reconsidered, that these capital costs that have already been incurred will end up being reconsidered? Because the note there says they will be reconsidered. What guarantees can you give me and the rest of council that they won't be overlooked?
They won't be overlooked. And I mean...
You've got processes in place that would prevent that from happening. Because as I see it, the fact that the effect of the resolution on the 9th of May is to move that cost from the developer to the rates citywide, which in the long term is not trivial at all, because that cost will then have to be borne by the ratepayers. 100%
That's right.
by
So
the ratepayers.
yes, there are. So there's been a PricewaterhouseCooper review report on there. There's been, before that was even landed, there's been a review of the QA processes. There's been collaboration between the capital and the growth units to close gaps. The additional and the best security is simply that when you do a full 10-year plan review, you get, the entire capital program, which of course will be different by nature, and that program is then gone through on a rigorous case by, project by project basis.
So you pick up the recent capital expenditure that might temporarily have been omitted, because that's effectively what will happen over the next 2 years, won't it?
So firstly, I'd say that you would have to actively choose to exclude it. It will be in by default.
So Councillor Pascoe, if Council, let's say, at this point in time makes a decision to fast-track a change to the 10-year plan through a special consultative procedure to invest in, I don't know, let's make up a bridge, a northern bridge, and decide to do that and put that into a 10-year plan, that would be a significant change. You'd have to go through an SCP. Council still has the ability at that point in time to consider whether or not they want to include that capital item in the 10-year plan. Nothing prohibits you from making positive assertions if you want to include a change in your 10-year plan. For example, let's say some form of special purpose vehicle to the north, which is not on the case, not on the board, make sure I'm not promising things. You still have the ability to go through an SCP, go out to consult on your 10-year plan for that change, go out and consult on your development contribution policy for that change, make a decision to include it or not in your DC charges and continue down that track as well. So that's your prerogative as council.
Okay. Omitting those capital costs over the next 2 years, do you think that if a decision is made in 2 years, then to bring those costs back in, is that likely to lead to concerns within the development community that we're chopping and changing in terms of the way that we apply the DC policy, and that we're creating some additional costs at that particular point that they may not have had a fair chance to budget on?
So I believe the intention of that resolution on the 9th of May was to provide the developers the certainty that they can have consistent charges and then move into that substantive review. So the intention of that was not to bind the council and to say whether or not it can introduce legitimate projects into the policy. So I think that's the first point. And then when we go to a full review, there's an SCP consultative process. You know, there's a full opportunity for full-blown opportunity. And also one of the initiatives that I want to take leading up to the 10-year plan is to, in fact, developing a project now to provide a roadmap, through the next annual plan, through the next 10-year plan, and engage developers a lot earlier and have a better strategic approach to doing these policy reviews. And so what you're talking to is something that would be benefit from that approach, I think.
Okay. I'd like to perhaps certainly there would be some benefit in doing that. That leads me to paragraph 34, where you mention about the modelling accuracy and the fact that the development community are still quite suspicious of how we calculate DCs. Is there any reason why we can't make available, say, through their associations like the Property Council and so forth, how we do the calculations so that they can validate those? And I think also the Burl report that we had that validated that we were complying with the Local Government Act in terms of how development contributions were being calculated. First of all, can we do that? And would it go some way towards removing the suspicion that the development community have over how we calculate those charges?
So I think we've still got more to learn about how to kind of educate or provide comfort, because as we all know, the growth model in and of itself is very complex, and it's substantive as well. Like it's not just to try and understand it, it's that it's a big model. So, and then you have the DC model itself, which again is complicated. So, I mean, we had a year-long, which you're involved in the process with the developers, where we really tried to get into the detail, and we probably learnt that maybe that wasn't necessarily the best way. And then if you go and try and be high level about it, maybe they feel like they don't understand quite enough. So I think we're still learning how to get them to be confident while realising that they have other jobs and other ambitions and they don't necessarily want to become DC experts. External reviews, Burl review, economic review, etc., hopefully that would give them a baseline level of confidence where we've gone and sought out external experts who said, yes, it's legitimate. So that's one method. And I think, again, we've got more to learn. There are more ways to do it. And I think with Jen and myself and through that roadmap process is try to unpick that a bit more. So that would be my answer. And yes, there's always going to be scepticism because it's a taxation model that is complicated. And if you're sceptical or cynical about, local government taxation methods, then you might always be sceptical of the DC model. So yeah, there's I don't know, it's a bit of a balance. I think I've made progress over that, and in terms of making things simpler. And then on the other hand, clearly it's not people aren't generally happy with the explanations. So yeah.
Yeah, so Councillor Rob, I've already started talking with a number of developers about how we can actually change the nature of the conversation. Because what we did last time with the year-long review is everything got wrestled into the detail, and it paralysed the process because we started debating at a minutiae level interpretation issues, which ultimately came down to legitimate assumptions being made by council that weren't considered as being legitimate from the developer point of view, and that stalled at that level. What we've learnt from some of the presenters through the DC hearings is they're starting to see the bigger picture in terms of maybe some of the parts have certain outcomes, but there's other economic impacts, there's different directions that can be impacted by these decisions. If you put DCs up, what does that mean for growth and so forth? So what the conversation I'm having with developers is how can we change the conversation away from fighting in the trenches to actually having a bit more of an open discussion, which is what Greg's talking to. And that process is all underway. I've even asked one of the developers to actually draft terms of reference that would actually suit their intention at that strategic level. And they've come back to me with the terms of reference from the session from a year ago, which we never really achieved or followed. So we had good intent last time, we just didn't follow it. So I think we just need to revisit it again. But there's goodwill on both sides to actually make some sense out of this.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. On page 34, paragraph 52, it says accordingly, or the last sentence is, accordingly, development contributions in Rotokauri will come down, where those elsewhere in the city will marginally increase. That strikes me as being illogical. So what we've said is that we've got some costs in Rotokauri, we're going to reduce them, and those costs, which are related to infrastructure in Rotokauri, I assume, that were initially, are now going to be dumped on developers in other parts of the city. Is that what that does?
So the costs don't change. What we're saying is who do we share them across?
Yep.
Secondly, the growth across the city is assumed to be fixed. So that's your Nydia, 1,250 houses per year. So what we're saying is that we've got better information that tells us a bit better. It's more or less likely that actually more growth will happen over here in Rotokauri, and then it has to come from somewhere, and it largely comes from the wider city, or mostly the general infill area, where there's a lot more development, there's a lot more growth projected. So growth models are mostly about where are you distributing the growth. We've got fixed growth at the top. Where do we distribute it? Now we've got some much better information about where it might go.
Growth models are about funding infrastructure.
So, well, for DCs, it's the cost divided by the growth. The cost doesn't change, that's locked in. So we're just, in Rotokauri, there'll be a bit more growth, so that will mean the DC a bit lower. And then a bit of growth has been redistributed from all across the infill. And so all across the infill, the charges, all things being equal, increase slightly. That's what that comment means.
But how do you justify that if they're not, A, causing the growth, or B, benefiting from the growth?
It's more, so it's that the growth caused or benefited, and then you redistribute the growth. So the growth model, again,
redistribute the costs, you mean?
No, the costs are the same. You're just sharing them over more or less people.
Yeah, which is redistributing the costs.
Yeah. So I think Councillor Gary's right. So basically, the cost at a macro level stay the same, but based on reassessment, based on the cause and the benefit of the fact that we're going to have increased growth because of the SHA to the north, but the overall growth of the city doesn't change. It means a distribution. It means some from over there is going to be put over there, and it's going to rebalance up. So it changes the growth number, which divided into the actual cost of growth, changes the distribution.
The cost of growth stays the same because there's some development going on out there, which is caused by those people out there. They get the benefit of it.
Yep.
Are you suggesting that people who are not causing or getting the benefit of it should be paying for it by this process?
So the cause benefit, it doesn't change. Nothing's been done there. The cause benefit says, like, roads in the Rotokauri catchment, they should be distributed across growth in the Rotokauri catchment.
Yep.
And then we just know a bit more about how much growth we think might be in the Rotokauri catchment.
Yep, so,
So you're
it's,
saying
it's
you
a
haven't
layered
got-
situation, Councillor Gary. So you've
Sorry?
got a layered situation. You got the total cost of growth.
Yeah.
Then that growth is allocated by cause and benefit across the various catchments.
Yep.
Right? What we're saying is within each catchment, there's a different level of growth numbers in terms of HUEs, right? And because we're
So
saying...
what you're dividing by, yep.
Yeah, what we're dividing by, and because of that, it changes the way that those amounts are distributed within catchments, which means you get ups and downs, but they overall settle back to the total growth number.
Okay, that just doesn't seem to me like the cost of the growth in a particular catchment. It seems to me you're starting to move that out of that catchment into another catchment, which doesn't
No,
have anything to do with
because
it.
what we're saying is our capital program in itself has been allocated against catchments. We've identified based on certain growth information where, and there might be some tweaks within, if there was a significant movement in growth, it might change the allocation of cost to a catchment. For example, if we said, rightio, this growth cell that's been delivered is going to halve the number of people living there, the capital team may reassess the fact that we don't need to put so much infrastructure in there, which would change the growth line. We haven't argued that in this case, I don't think. So what we've argued is that the shift in numbers doesn't have a direct impact on the capital investment. We're still saying roughly, you know, let's say 50% of capital items in this cell is growth related, 50% is level of service related. That 50% that's growth, we're now dividing by a different number. So even though there's been a redistribution in growth, it wasn't significant enough to trigger a change in the way we're investing in our capital infrastructure. That makes sense?
That's right.
Oh, God, thank God for that.
A similar example is if you
You
have
were
a
just winging that, weren't you?
I was, yeah, but it makes sense in my head.
If you have a catchment and you have 1,000 houses in it, and you're going to distribute the costs across that catchment, whatever they are, and then there's a district plan change, and now there's duplexes all across it, so there's double the density, then you're going to distribute the same costs, but you're just going to share them across more people. So each duplex would pay less. So that's really what we're doing.
I understand that.
Yeah,
that-
it's the same thing, basically, yeah.
all right. Okay, and then the gross, was it the FGA or the AEFG or something like that?
GFA.
Our commentary on that, should the commentary says it's because it's a small amount of money.
What paragraph are you on, Councillor Gary? Excuse me.
Yep. Stuff. Page 70, sorry, paragraph 76, I think. 56, is it? Yeah, 56, beg your pardon, yeah. The GFA, it is, GFA, suggests that it was because it was not material, but in actual fact, I thought from the submissions that in actual fact it was, we accepted that that didn't have a material impact on demand, as opposed to, it wasn't a cost issue, it was that it just didn't make a...
Yeah, those were the submission issues around canopies.
Yeah, which is the primary driver of this issue, I think. I could be wrong.
That, in fact, is...
That's what I picked up
That's just
from
reflective of the general confusion around the amendment. So the reason, in fact, we've recommended not to make the change because it's a trivial change, and in fact, it was misunderstood. And I don't know, is it a paradox that in fact we tried to change it to reduce the confusion, and in fact there was more confusion by the amendment. So simply put, it's vaguely related to GFA. It reflects one instance where a very small type of canopy, so it might be 1% of all canopies or 0.5%, basically the little covering over a courier window, doesn't talk to any of the other canopies. And that was part of the confusion with the developers, is that they saw that, and the submissions were about canopies, about big canopies over doorways, where there is significant works underneath, or all these wider issues, right?
Things like that.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, okay, they've misinterpreted it, or maybe I haven't explained it well enough what the amendment was. In fact, it was very trivial, and it was because when we get applications and our assessment people are there, people are appealing to this provision about little windows and applying it to canopies. So my suggestion was, let's just take that out because it's being misunderstood. It's not helping anyone. It's a little tidy up. And then there was strong submissions against it. It's trivial. So my recommendation is just leave it as it is.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Paula.
They weren't in those hearings that we had, those submissions anyway from the development development community, they talked a number of them talked a great deal about triggers that either slow or incentivise growth. So they were saying that if the DCs hit them too hard in the pocket, what we'll see as a consequence of that is perverse to what we're hoping to do, which is grow the city. And they gave some examples of that where projects are on the go slow, and they indicated on behalf of quite substantial companies that they may not go ahead as fast with projects because of the inability to raise the capital to do those with the DC being so high. So what consideration post that have we given to that whole argument about when do we know when DCs become a barrier to growth as opposed to some of the incentives we're trying to do with the 66% CBD remission and so on is to encourage them to crack on with the development, do it, get on with it. That's what we want. So how do we know or measure that? How do we know when we're having a negative impact or a perverse impact through the amount of development contributions we charge?
So it's an important question.
It is an important question.
It's particularly important if charges are at the higher end, because that you may approach the feasibility sort of threshold, say, where people may make a decision to go ahead or not to go ahead. That is part of the package and the analysis that we are bringing in mid-September to that report. So that's not something that is specifically consulted on. We do need to do some work, but so I have engaged Inside Economics, who's highly recommended economist. We've used him before. He wrote the developer impacts report that we provided with the 10-year plan, which talked about precisely that. What is the impact of high DCs? What's the impact of different types of DCs and whether they're high or not? So residential, non-residential, etc. So he made a set of observations and recommendations, and so I've engaged him to update his report by re-engaging with developers such as the ones that came to understand what their costs, their feasibility, their investment sensitivity is. That's part of it. A second part of this discussion, which Richard and I have talked about, is to also look at the other side of the coin and put some more investigation of what's the benefit of growth to the city and the community. Like, for example, job increases, increased amenity or increased activity, vibrancy, any of these measures, because partly, we do spend with developers arguing, say, whether or not they put the impacts on, but there's another question in the other paradigm is, well, what benefits is this growth providing? Like, what are they doing in terms of jobs? And I think there's some important things to learn there, where we may learn that there are more benefits of their developments. And so these are sort of broader economic questions and feasibility questions, and so we're underway, and we'll be pulling that information together.
So there's one key part that's also missing as well, is that we've firstly got to identify what the DCs are, what the impact on the community, on growth is, but we also then need to consult with the community as to whether they care about that aspect. That's why we're taking our time to do it right, and why it's part of the key input to the next 10-year plan, because it may well be that whilst we think as council that let's say capping DCs is the best thing to do because it'll stimulate growth, maybe the community doesn't care. And we've got to have that conversation with the community as well, in terms of, because if we cap it, rates go up. And so it's having that compromise conversation. So that's the next part that Greg's been challenged with, and I've challenged them to turn the economic data into something that can actually be consumed by the community to make better decisions for them from a 10-year plan perspective.
Well, that's right. So we will, in that work that Inside Economics will do, they'll also look at some of the metrics we'd use to measure sensitivity, like price points and things like that. So,
yep, absolutely.
So that we can, as councillors like to say, be nimble if we have to in the development, because we don't want to pay the price over a number of years. We want to address this quickly, right? Yep. So in terms of, and my final question then, one more actually. What was your view on, we had a argument that the CBD remissions should apply just a little bit further from bridge to bridge, so that riverside land that presents a good opportunity for townhouses, for example, riverside townhouses could be included. Where did you go with that, or is that also on the back burner till September?
Yeah, so we're addressing the things in this report that we consulted with the public on, so that we can make those decisions. And then there's a number of important issues that both you've referred to two there, which again, yeah, will come to that meeting. I'd say quickly on the boundaries, you know, there's always someone who agrees that a boundary should move to here and someone who believes that it shouldn't. So you have to have a basis behind that. And at the moment, the CBD area is the BID district, Business Improvement District, which has its own type of science behind it in terms of that's the business area. Certainly council can contemplate, and we would give our analysis as to if you wanted to have a change.
So, yeah, we're getting way off subject here.
Off topic,
Team,
yeah.
way off subject. This is not what this paper's about in any shape or form. We're into zoning now.
No. I was just asking where that was something that one of the people who submitted to us
Yeah, but we've had
raised.
deliberations on all of that. We've been through all of that at
I
a
want
previous
to know
meeting.
when that will be picked up in terms of debate.
So today is about whether we accept this policy or not.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I have got my answer. Can I continue with my question, please? Another question.
Yes, to stay on track of the report, please.
Thank you. So in respect to that then, we're making a decision today that has a short-term, well, a medium-term implication. It's going to set the annual plan, and more broader considerations of development contributions will occur in September, and those will shape the long-term plan the year and a half after that. Is that how this goes?
Yeah, that's right, yep.
Okay, so anybody who didn't find satisfaction, any of those submitters that didn't find satisfaction with this result, their opportunity is to engage with council before September and help us get the evidence we need to set the long-term plan in the right direction.
And that's right, and that's part of that roadmap plan that I want to develop so that we can go through these things in a strategic fashion, you know, because I feel there's been, you know, a little bit too reactive perhaps, and that's partly on me to have not, you know, provided a better picture of, you know, developing out how do you amend your DC policy and move it, modernise it, you know, as you go forward through 10-year plans.
Yeah, no, I just want to understand where and when we deal with each part of it. That's a
Information
reasonable
report mid-September.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Anytime we bring in caps and things like that, that's an acknowledgement that for some reason the fair and honest apportionment of costs to that particular entity or catchment
Question, Councillor Gary? Your question.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to hear your political views. I want to hear the question.
I don't care if you want to hear them or not. I've got a question I want to answer.
Yeah, well, go to your question.
Don't interrupt
Go to
all
your
the time.
question,
We'll get
please.
there. That is an acknowledgement, is it not, that the terrain out there or something like that, the cost of infrastructure up there is greater than we or someone conceives can go ahead.
Yeah, it could mean that.
Yeah. So that is a huge challenge to the growth place for growth thing. In fact, it completely obliterates growth place for growth, doesn't it?
I don't think it does.
Well, it does in that situation. How can you say if the growth is if it's $1 million to put the infrastructure in there and there's only one development because it's in there and that guy pays $1 million DC's looking at the absurd.
Yeah, so
that would be bad planning as well.
I'll jump.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I guess my question is, to what extent is it do we have to accept the reality that Rotokauri, for example, and I understand from 1970s there have been reports saying it's just too hard to do the water out here. So any time you go out here, you're going to have to pay this. I assume that most of the people who bought the land out there were aware of those things. Now someone's going to have to pay the piper, and the cost of that infrastructure is becoming real.
Yeah, the simple answer is yes.
Yeah. So what we are doing here is there an acceptance in our policy that there are some places that just can't be developed?
I don't know that the DC policy should be informing those decisions. Certainly what it says is that given the state of affairs and the investment we're going to make and the number of people we think are going to go there, that looks really expensive to recover those costs. We also showed at the 4th of April meeting that you have to put it in context. In terms of doing those caps in Rotokauri, you go from 100% growth pays for growth, you know, in inverted commas, we take the full DCs, we make no reduction. That comes down with these caps to something like 96 or 97%. So you can say, yeah, from a purist perspective, you're not recovering, you know, 100% of what you consider to be growth, but you're considering 97, you're taking 97%. And then we also should recognise that our determination of what a growth costs has a whole lot of assumptions around it. So, you know, there's something about matching the level of certainty that we have. So the Rotokauri caps are a small reduction.
Just go through the certainty thing again. So what do you mean matching the certainty?
There's an inherent level of, you know, ambiguity or grey area around what exactly is a growth cost. So you can't say actually for certain. So what I'm saying is if you have a small change in what you consider to be growth, it's probably within the about amount of certainty you had in the first place. Does that make that's not a very good explanation?
So Councillor Mallett, it's not a development contributions policy discussion. This is more of a broader district plan discussion in terms of where this council has zoned land for growth, right? And
no, as a consequence of what the district plan has done, we have DC implications.
So ultimately, what we've got is some zoning in place. When we go through the district plan, of course, people that own land out there do everything they can to argue that that land is developable. In fact, they potentially could have gone off and sought economic assessments, infrastructure assessments that suggest there are some economical and viable solutions for the infrastructure out there. What happens over 20, 30 years when these things finally come to fruition is that A, the standards potentially have moved since we've zoned it, or that the initial work that was done to determine infrastructure response was inadequate. It suited a district plan appeal process, doesn't actually suit reality. And so we end up in a position where we come through to this position, we've opened it up as a city, we have a legal obligation to service it to a degree, and now we're in a position where we put the capital response in there and we allocate it to growth, and then there's an inevitable outcome of the developer going, whoa, that actually is quite expensive. At that point, whether they progress or not comes down to the extent to which this council or otherwise decides whether or not they want to cap those costs, and that is therefore acknowledging that they believe that we've got to progress with this, but the ratepayer should meet some of those costs, and that's a decision for this council to make.
Okay, so I'll move the staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor James. We'll move to debate. There is no debate. We'll move to the vote. Councillor Robb.
Chair, look, I'll be supporting this, but I do have a concern that we still seem to have a disconnect between growth costs and how these can equitably be shared between resident ratepayers and developers. We are, by the very nature of what we've discussed today and on the 9th of May, challenging one of this council's imperatives of being the best in business and our own financial guideline of growth paying for growth. And we're doing that financial guideline we're putting that financial guideline under challenge in less than it's one that is currently less than 12 months old. I do welcome from the comments from the Chief Executive of a closer relationship so that developers can understand council's need to recover the growth they cause. And I think that the application of the current policy, and this is a concern, the application of the current policy does not appear to be consistent, and this needs urgent study with outcomes that are understood and shared amongst the stakeholders. And I note in this case that we have been a little bit lax in sharing these changes with those residents who are funding city rates.
Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Thanks, staff, for the report. I think under the principle that this policy is founded on growth pays for growth, you have done your best to respond to the submitters' concerns. However, our policy is supposed to provide predictability and certainty for investment to occur in our city, and it won't come as a surprise to any member in this chamber that I haven't been on board with this policy from the start. I will support the staff recommendations because, as I have said, I think staff have done as much as they can while trying to maintain that principle of growth pays for growth. And yet nearly every submission that we got, and this is a deliberations meeting, told us that this policy and these further changes create uncertainty and more unpredictability. You know, when an expert in his field, Bill Mitchellmore, says to us that this policy is difficult to understand, we should be listening. Many submitters said that charges are excessive, and the staff report acknowledges the risks around that. If charges are excessive, a result of that could be suppressed growth. And this has been my consistent opposition to this particular policy. Growth pays for growth is too blunt. Linda Woolley told us that the policy in its current form will not help us to achieve our aspirations for city growth, and that concerns me. Murtaugh Construction told us through their submission that we have overplayed our hand, and that creates uncertainty. I don't think that it is the staff and the department that these submitters have overwhelmingly said they don't trust. I think that the staff and department in this area have done a very, very good job. I think the words used by submitters, mistrust, distrust and no longer trust, they're referring to council and our governance with this policy. The fact that we keep moving the goalposts, and I worry about that. One submitter also used the words unlawful, and I worry about that. And look, I need to be fair here. In my time on council, I've observed when we hear from these big organisations, they are always measured with their comments to us. They are systematic with their comments to us, and they offer solutions and alternatives, but not this time. Those words, mistrust, unlawful, uncertainty and failure, worry me, greatly worry me with this policy. We should be creating certainty for them, and they're telling us overwhelmingly that we're not. I think the issue is the principle, the blunt principle that this is based on, which is growth pays for growth. Is that it? Great, right. So those are my issues and those are my concerns for our city, but I will be supporting the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Just very quickly, I also was going to raise issues around the definition of what growth means in actual fact when you say growth pays for growth, because clearly we all want the same thing, which is to grow a viable city that economically and in terms of housing and communities. I'm really pleased to hear that you're doing that difficult job, and I know it's difficult, around the economics of all this, so that we can, as councillors, have certainty that when we adopt a principle like growth pays for growth, or we adopt a policy behind that, that we're going to get the outcomes that we're all seeking, which is, you know, robust housing growth, community growth, and inner city revitalisation. Those are the things that we have, as governors, committed to. So I'm pleased that at least that will happen. It's been a bit of a peculiar process and timing for me, because in those submitters' evidence, we heard all kinds of things that I would have liked to have been able to more fully debate or digest or even ask them questions. Of course, we were prevented from doing that at that time. So we're making the one set of decisions here, and then in September we're going to look into detail at some of the other issues that were raised. I felt like I was in a hearing, like a proper scheduled one hearing, but without the ability to actually dive in and digest and understand. I just had to accept what was said, and there really hasn't been very much robust debate by this council since on this matter. Staff have done a very good job, and I am supporting you in this, and I know that you do understand that bigger picture that we're all driving at, and that you're putting your minds about it, so that gives me some comfort for a better, more robust discussion in September on the big picture. Thank you.
Councillor Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I'll be supporting these recommendations today. I listened very carefully and respectfully to the submissions from the development community a couple of weeks back, and I think we gave them a really good hearing. I do have, this is a complicated area, no doubt about it. It's a difficult area. I do have a lot of trust in the work our staff have done here. It has been reviewed as well. And respectfully, we have a job of balancing everyone's interests in the community and deciding what's best for Hamilton overall. In submission processes, you will get people very strongly pushing their point of view. It doesn't mean it's right. We may not have it 100% right either, but we have to listen to everyone. We have to take everyone's views into account. I was impressed by some of the submissions because they were thoughtful. I thought Foster's were thoughtful. They questioned the GFA and confusion that the definition was causing, but also emphasised the need for certainty for the development community, which has been touched on today, Councillor Ryan and others, and some of the other ones too. I thought some of the submissions were really quite bold in their, as Councillor Southgate says, they were really basically, some of them were saying, look, we might just walk away from this. So it remains to be seen what happens there, but I still think we're doing the right thing. I think we did the right thing by removing the capital projects that we'd put in, and I'm also pleased that we just kept that definition of the GFA because it just seemed to be causing unnecessary angst, really. I'm pleased with the CBD remissions, where that is. I think we're keeping that in the right place. There is still some work that needs to be done in that CBD. And I do reject suggestions that by making some compromises in this policy, we are somehow challenging our growth versus growth, growth pays for growth policy. I think it's incorrect to paint it as some sort of huge disturbance in the force because we've made a couple of compromises here. This is what policy is about, listening to people, not coming out with some black and white theoretical point of view and sticking rigidly to it, but listening to what people say. And we are indeed adopting a policy of growth pays for growth, as the strong submissions from the development community attest. But there is room for discretion and grey areas, such as how to handle rotokari. So to suggest that if we don't stick to this black and white policy, we've walked away or challenged growth pays for growth, I think is just incorrect and probably a bit infantile, to be honest. We are addressing our growth needs and we are doing it in a way which we think fairly balances the responsibility between development, community and ratepayers. And I'm hopeful that this time round we're planning for growth in a way that won't give the new council a nasty surprise in its first year. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Yeah, I feel similarly to Councillor Jeff, who's just spoken. I also think that there's, in my experience, there's been more robust and extensive debate on this issue in this council than I've ever seen in 6 councils before that, far more. Certainly far more than in the last couple of councils. It's clear that while we got the proposed policy that we had up until a few weeks ago technically right, it was growth pays for growth, we were too purist in a tactical sense. I think that's partly where Jeff's coming from. So we've made some tactical compromises. We have not made strategic compromises. We still intend in the long run for growth to pay for growth. And if we don't, we're being fools because the amount of growth that's coming up in the lift towards us is phenomenal. I have seen people in the community and even a couple of councillors from time to time say, well, we can't just accept whatever growth's coming. Well, look, we're not King Canute and he wasn't successful. You can't hold the tide back, and some more information that I received this morning, it's going to be shared with councillors in the next briefing, just shows the amount of possibilities in that area, and they're possibilities that the development community are jumping on all over the place. There are submissions from the development community that we have not seen yet that are coming forward in other people's plans, wanting to grow residential areas and commercial areas around the outskirts of Hamilton that will maybe before or after they eventuate come into Hamilton. So we're nuts to say that we want to hold back growth or have only the sort of growth that we like. We're faced with growth whether we like it or not, and it's a question of trying to manage it the best and fund it the best. It's clear that part of our discussions on funding are going to have to be with central government and other parties, because neither the ratepayers nor the developers can afford in a tactical sense, in a short-term sense, all the growth that's coming up in the lift at us. So we have to look wider for solutions. I think Councillor O'Leary said until this time the developers had been reasonable. I think she used the word measured in their submissions to us. That's not my experience. Whenever their company interests are threatened, in their opinion, they've been quite unmeasured, if there's such a word, quite frequently. But that's the nature of the game in politics. We get that also from some ratepayers if they think their financial interests are threatened as well. And our job, like Jeff said, is to balance it in a way that we can bring the majority of the city forward with us. If we want a viable city, we're going to have to work out how to manage the growth that is coming, whether we like it or not in the future.
Councillor Geary.
Thank you. And I wasn't going to speak until Dave said a really good thing, which I'm going to...
Another one?
No, just be careful what I'm going to finish this up with. He said that neither the ratepayer or the developers can pay for it. And I think in some situations that's what we're facing. We've got some parts of the city, I think, that with our current level of technology and infrastructure and knowledge, it's just damn expensive to do the development. And we're now hopping around like a cat on a hot tin roof trying to figure out who's going to get it. And we're doing it with caps and all sorts of stuff like that. I think we just have to accept the reality that it's just going to be damn expensive to do it out there. And maybe development will just have to wait. But what we're doing at the moment is trying to pretend that we can deal with it by shuffling it all around all over the place. And we're doing the same thing in with the CBD remissions. That's a situation where you've got a competitive commercial stroke retail area, which is clearly losing out to some other parts of the city because, and slowly the CBD is changing, but for a little while I think it will not be the retail pinnacle or something as it's supposed to be in our, we've got some high level, thank you, yes. And so I think that we need to realise that the people that we are here to represent, well, I'm here to represent the ratepayers, should not be footing the cost of development in the CBD. They should neither, should they be footing the cost of development around the city, unless they are clearly the beneficiaries of some of that. And some of the argument or the debate around the table and what we heard from staff, I don't think is a valid allocation of cost to ratepayers because it is a benefit to the city as a whole. It is trying desperately to get the DCs down. And as I said, the DCs are a cost. And the cost should go to the person or the entity that is causing that cost. And I think we are varying from that. And when we vary from that, I think we do so at our own peril. Thank you.
So firstly, I want to apologise to Councillor Paula. This is a deliberations report. I said it wasn't. So apologies for that earlier in questioning. We needed to make some changes to our DC policy, mainly driven by a mistake that was made where we didn't put some of the costs through. We talked about this at length and decided that we would flag that after going out to public consultation and listening to the submissions, because we weren't taking into the full picture of listening to the ratepayer as well as the developer. And I think we made the right decision to wait until the 10-year plan to sort that issue out. At the same time, there was the issue of the canopies, which we've also decided to set aside, and waiting for the right opportunity, which is the 10-year plan, to sort that out. Now, I just want to remind members that the district plan is the district plan that was voted through by the last council. So most of you were on that council, but not all of you. And so the district plan belongs to the councillors, because it is a plan that we brought through and that we supported. And that plan, and the plan before that, lets development happen in Rotokauri. Now, the submitters came in, spoke to us, we listened. The rates, the DC rates in Rotokauri are the highest in New Zealand. And we let development, as a council, we've let development happen out there. So some of the responsibility falls back on our shoulders. And through listening to the submissions, we've realised that, and we've kept those rates, which were the highest in New Zealand, down to the next highest rate of DCs that we have in our city for industrial development. And that's listening, and that's doing the right thing. I also want to point out that during debates, it's been pointed out that fiddling with growth base for growth is fiddling with the foundation of where we are and what we've done, and what our financial parameters are that we set during the 10-year plan. But the same members who are arguing that also have proposed no DCs in the CBD. You can't have it both ways. So what's happened is that we're doing exactly what elected members should be doing and what council should be doing, listening through a submissions process, through this deliberations process, and adjusting the policy so that we are being fair and reasonable and taking some of the responsibility for the decisions that have been made around this table on ourselves, on our own shoulders, which should have been done. And lastly, I just want to remind members that if developers aren't paying their way, and we want them to as much as possible, then at the end of the day, sooner or later, the ratepayer, the mums and dads of the city, has to pick up that tab. We'll go to the board to vote.
The motion is declared carried, 11 for, 1 against.
Okay, we'll stop for morning tea until 20 to 12.
Awesome. What about the DC on D6 cats?